So welcome to Business Women Australia's webinar, Leveraging Your Podcast Interview. I have Annemarie Cross online today, who is the podcasting queen, and we're going to be guided by her amazing expertise. It's such a great opportunity for us to have Annemarie. I'm Lyn Hawkins. I'm the National Director of Business Women Australia and the founder. And my contact details, lyn@businesswomenaustralia.com.au. For anyone who's watching the recording and hasn't had a chat to me, I would love to hear from you. And for those of you who are new to Business Women Australia, we'll go through very quickly what BWA is all about. But before we do, I would love to acknowledge the land on which we're meeting. In various places all around Australia, it's sacred, sovereign, Indigenous land that's been lived, danced and celebrated on for over 120,000 continuous years. And we pay our respect to all Indigenous elders, past, present and emerging, and their communities. And we celebrate our wonderful Indigenous sisters in business. I am actually in WA, I'm in Perth, and I am on the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. So I pay my respects especially to their cultural wisdom and wonderful involvement in our day-to-day lives. For those of you who don't know, I have a wonderful husband who works with the Yamatji Marlpa Aboriginal people in the Pilbara Gascoyne region in native title, and we have had the kings and queens of the Indigenous communities in our home. We've been very privileged, so I'm a lucky duck. Our vision is to be a national collaborative community in Australia. So we're all about raising the visibility of women in business and to help each other with the sharing of knowledge and building of our network of influence. We really are pretty keen on that, and we're very much a melting pot of women, from business owners and entrepreneurs right through to executives, professionals, management consultants, coaches, C-suite women, CEOs, CIOs, CMOs, women on boards, leaders, emerging leaders. We have some gorgeous students who joined us as a part of our scholarship pathways last year as well. But we focus predominantly on leadership, on how to improve ourselves. We're lifelong learners as leaders and emerging leaders. And so personal and professional growth is very much a hallmark of the areas of development that we focus on, in addition to those sort of improvement of business, influence profile, and of course, connecting and making awesome friendships. We take our values very seriously. So when we actually set about designing a business for women by women, we spend a lot of time actually talking about and doing some work around our shared values, and then how these values actually translate into our behaviours. And we call each other up on those behaviours if we're not being true to them, or it's really important that we are very welcoming. And I think that even though we're a brand that's very much attracts very successful women in leadership roles, we also recognise that it's very important that everyone feels welcome here, no matter where they are in their journey in business and life. So loads of benefits. We'd love to talk more about that, but I think if you're thinking about joining as a financial member, all our online events are available for you while you're considering membership, and it can be as long as you like. They're online for free. And of course, we've got awesome face-to-face meetings happening as well. So that's pretty gorgeous, because we're starting to get that opportunity to network in person. Sometimes lockdown gets in the way, as Helen knows. She went and bought all the morning tea for the Brisbane Roundtable, and she's having to eat that over the next 4 days all by herself. But one of the great benefits of being a member is you get access to all these amazing short courses at no cost. There's, I think, 36 to 40 short courses, thousands of dollars worth of learning right there at your own pace. I think they're around 90 minutes long. So all our members get access to those. And we've also launching our 100% scholarship and 15% scholarships, the next round coming up. So watch this space. If you know of anyone who wants to do a degree or a diploma or MBA, whatever, get them to have a look on our website and put in the application We'll match them up with Jessica Panque from Torrens University, Australia. And Jessica will be able to talk through the options that are available. Torrens Uni is the most progressive, fastest growing university in Australia. It's privately owned, and we are so proud to be partnering with TUA. So if you are social, join our LinkedIn group, whether you're a member, a financial member or not. It's free for everyone. Share your workshops, share what you're doing. If you've got an association or a women's group, if you've got, things and events, if you've got articles or blogs that you want everyone to know about, this is our gift to business women all around Australia. I think there's 3,500 members in there, and it's absolutely free to join. So jump on there, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course our website has all our events on there. And we wouldn't be able to do anything that we do without our amazing partners. They are really the backbone of this business and enable us to keep our costs down and our ability to deliver the amazing program that we do. It's quite phenomenal. We work very collaboratively with these amazing companies. So it's $299 for 12 months membership. If you want to be a part of our design co-creation team, host events, be featured on our podcasts, be profiled, have a sort of joint event with us, have a chat to me about becoming a premium level member. Our premiums are highly invested in what we do. They're very generous with the sharing of their knowledge, and they really are part of the reason we're able to have such a phenomenal program of topics. All around the country, we're meeting with people in Rockingham and Perth, Melbourne and Sydney. We would have had Brisbane face-to-face. Our next online free event for everyone is developing a success mindset. Georgia Bamba is, she's got a master's in psych. She's an amazing coach. She's been asked so many times, not just, okay, I know I have to develop a success mindset, but how do I go about doing that? How do I do that? So we're actually going to have a deep dive on Monday, the 19th of April on that. So that's going to be an interesting one. I always find George's events very interesting. So our events are often smaller. Other than our roundtables, everything's pretty much recorded. Our roundtables, obviously, Chatham House rules, and our courageous conversations, parts of those that we do with Vita Carlino, who's online. If we do them online, they're not recorded as well, because we have Chatham House rules. What goes on in the room stays in the room, so it's more open sharing. But of course, our podcast, we wouldn't be able to do our Business Women Australia podcast without the phenomenal Annemarie Cross. And Annemarie is the queen of podcasting. Before podcasting became such a popular medium for amplifying a message, Annemarie was already a pioneer in the industry. So we are very lucky to have Annemarie to actually give us her tips and guidance on how to really leverage your podcast interview. So I'm going to stop sharing. Annemarie, you can start sharing. And while we do that, we welcome Sue Daly, who's come and Karina, who's come in online since we've said hello to each other. Welcome, ladies. Good to see you here. I wasn't sure, Sue, if we were going to miss out on you.
Good. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, fabulous. So what I want you to do today is share with you information that's not only going to help you leverage the podcast interview that you'll have an opportunity to do on Business Women Australia podcast, but also if you're going to be leveraging other podcast interviews as well. And many of the things that we talk about today, you can probably implement across even other media platforms as well, such as radio, TV, that kind of thing. All right, let's dive in. So just to recap on what we will be covering, I want to share why so many businesses don't generate the best ROI from their podcast interviews or any media interviews for that matter, how to leverage your podcast interview to nurture listeners along the customer or stakeholder journey, things that many people don't touch. In fact, a lot of times when I'm sharing any information, people often say to me, this is very much around business building, isn't it? Absolutely. A podcast is a message amplification vehicle. And as we know, we're all in business. So we need to have ROI, not just the amplification of our message, but how many leads are we getting? How many clients are we getting from those interviews? So that's very much focused on business building as well. The one pager that you should have on your website so that you can leverage all media opportunities and how to repurpose your interview into multiple course snippets, building your thought leadership, and the tools that I use and recommend. They're listed in the workbook, so check them out. We use them daily across our podcast network, and I would not recommend anything that I'm not using myself. So as Lyn was saying, I've been doing podcasting before podcasting was a thing. I started in the career industry in the area of personal branding, resume writing, all of that stuff to help people stand out and get a job that they loved. Started the first podcast in 2008 when the global financial crisis hit. So everything I've learned from that date, and I've made many mistakes and then some, but everything that I've learned through trial and error and what I've seen really start to take shape around the podcasting visibility space and how we can leverage that. Many of us I know are service-based businesses. So we are experts, we're thought leaders in our field, and we want to amplify that message and make a much bigger impact, not just throughout Australia, but over the world as well. And so hopefully everything that I share with you today is really valuable to you. So I'm sure you've heard the saying, any publicity is good publicity. So have a think about what you're feeling is around or what comes up for you. Some people say, yeah, absolutely. As long as my name is out there and people are talking about me, there is some form of publicity that we can leverage and benefit from. But I say, look, if the publicity that you're getting, even if it is a great interview and you've really talked about all of the things that you need to share and you know it's going to make an impact, if you're not generating results, then I don't think it's good publicity. And also too, if it tarnishes your brand through negative coverage. So you may have a podcast host that doesn't really position your content in the best possible way, because a lot of podcast hosts are probably in business themselves. They may not have gone through journalist training, interview training, that kind of thing. So you need to be even more determined and aware that what you share before you even get onto the interview with that podcast host is as clear as possible. And often I find that guests aren't really as clear. And so I just wanted to share that. Again, not good publicity, especially if you're not able to leverage off of the publicity that you are getting through Business and Women Australia podcast, obviously, but other podcasts that you may also have the opportunity to share your message on. Now, here's one of the things that I often see, and this is why businesses don't generate the best results from their podcast interviews or any media interviews for that matter. So when you have a look at this diagram here, it really is letting you know about when you think about your audience and the one opportunity that you have to share that message at that particular point in time, right then and there. If we were to freeze that moment in time, marketers kind of say that at any particular point of time, 55% of people are unaware that they even have an issue. They're not aware that even your product or service exists. 25% of people are aware, 17% are in decision-making mode, and only 3% are actively buying. And out of that 3%, it's probably a smaller percentage of those people who are your exact ideal, perfect client. And so when we have a look at that one moment in time, unless, and would be impossible, well, not anything's possible, but everybody who's your ideal client was listening at that exact moment in time, watching the live stream at that moment in time, it just doesn't happen because people are busy. They may like to catch the recording later. So what we want to do today is cover some different strategies on what you can start to implement so that you can leverage your interview no matter what time of day it is gone live, or no matter how long a time frame it has been since you've done that interview. And that's where I want to introduce you to what I call the customer journey, because that slide that I just showed you of the different percentages of people will capture a portion of the customer journey. And a customer journey really is the path of strategic sequential steps and interactions that a customer goes through with a company, your company, a product or a service, to build, know, like, and trust. And all of you have probably got some people on your marketing team, or you've done some marketing, so you have a bit of an awareness of a customer journey. And I like to keep things really simple and say, look, there's 3 stages of a customer or buyer's journey. There's the awareness stage, consideration stage, and decision stage. And there are different steps that you can take in each of these stages, which I'm going to go through today, so you're aware of them and you and your team can ensure that you start building out some of the collateral and some of the pieces that you want to have in place to maximize every single one of those stages. And so, when you think about your podcast interview, the podcast interview often is when someone first has an interaction with you, your business, the message that you're sharing. And so it really does play a very important piece in building awareness. However, when done strategically, you can also, for those ideal clients, the audience that are listening, if they're your ideal clients and they're ready to take that next step, if you deliver a great interview, and I've got some steps to show you, what you can follow as a framework so that you give an exceptional interview and they cannot wait to get in contact with you if they're ready, and you can begin nurturing prospective customers into that consideration stage. Now, one other point that I want to mention in the awareness stage, when you're thinking about your community, because one of the things that so often, especially from Business Women Australia podcast point of view, and Lyn and I have often spoken about this, and any podcast interview, often what we think is, I want to get known with many, many more people and build that new audience. But what we don't realize is there are people who have already been nurtured, who've already reached out to you, who've already met you at networking events, who may have already inquired about you, that this particular interview may just be a resource or an interaction with you to go, yep, I love that. I want to speak more about how we might be able to work together. So not only thinking about your podcast interview as an awareness building with new audience, but maybe just enable you to remain top of mind. So just wanted to share that too before we dive into, let's have a look at what are some of the things you can do before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview. So I'll run through these, and then I'm sure at the end of today's session, we'll have some opportunities for some Q&A so that we can kind of focus that through the lens of your specific business and situation. Now, before the interview, I would always recommend, obviously, with some of the things that we're talking about today, it's an absolute given that being on BWA podcast means that you are going to get in front of the right people, the right audience, and getting that right nurturing strategy in place. But when we're looking outside, when you're looking outside other opportunities of podcasts, you really have to do your due diligence, because not every interview is going to be best for you. For instance, is that podcast host and the podcast itself, is it creating a community or attracting a community who have a similar culture and understanding and values to you? Because how that host interacts with you is going to determine very much what their audience thinks and feels and experiences when they hear you on the podcast. And a podcast very much can be likened to a stage and you speaking on stage. And I've heard horror stories where a speaker has spoken in front of an audience, but it's been the wrong audience. And the strategies being taught, the examples being shared, almost offended a small group of people in that audience because a speaker didn't do research before to make sure that it was a relevant audience, and then either tweaked the examples or realized, look, this is not the best opportunity for me. So always make sure that the podcast that your PR agent or your team is approaching is a good fit for you and the audience you're looking to attract. Always ensure that your topic is relevant to the services and products that you specialize in. Otherwise, what can happen is you could end up watering down your message and reputation. And I know all of you are either thought leaders already, or you're building your collateral to really position that expertise that is really going to make a difference in your area of an industry. And one of the reasons I share that is because, so often we will think, oh, yes, I'd love to go and talk about that particular topic, which is something that I did many years ago. I, as I mentioned, was a personal branding strategist, and many of my colleagues around my local area saw that I was using podcasting and social media to expand my message. So they would often ask me to go and speak about social media. So I was happy to share. But what ended up happening was I was speaking to one of my colleagues who sat on the same committee on a women's networking group for many years, and it was before the meeting started, and she started to share that she just hired a branding consultant because she wanted to do a bit of rebranding. Mid-sentence, after sharing that with me, she turned to me, she goes, "Oh, you actually do branding, don't you?" I said, "Yes, I do." She said, "I'm so sorry. I started to see you as the social media guru." Now, I watered down my message because I said yes, that I would speak about that topic. Now, knowing more about how to position a message, this was many years ago, I would have said, how to use social media to build your reputation as a trusted authority, so you're seen as a thought leader in your industry. I would have made sure that the accompanying message continued to tie in to the message that I really wanted to continue to build that authority in. So be mindful that either the topic's relevant and you can bring people back to your service or main offering, and if not, maybe it's not the best approach. Because what would often happen when I finished speaking, people would say, "Well, can we hire you? Can you do some training on social media?" And that was not part of my offering. So in hindsight, I probably would have said, "Look, happy to share, let me record it, and then you can go and use that within your network." So be mindful of that, because the end in mind and what next should always lead to a particular conversation, or I'll share some other things that relate to your offerings. Now, also to ensure that the next step, which is the call to action, is really compelling enough so that the people who are the smaller portion of the audience who are ready to take that next step are compelled to take that next step. And that next step is to get people off that podcast and onto your list, onto your database. And so the best strategy is a list building strategy. I tend typically to use a quiz or a checklist. You know that I have a number of different podcasts. So for me, I've created a podcast series which really nurtures my ideal clients through a process of learning, ahas, mini wins, and then the email sequence kind of nurtures them into the next step. There's a whole kind of funnel and steps that we take through the customer journey. So I encourage you to do that as well. One of the reasons this is so important is because we saw what happened, particularly here. Actually, it was Australia-wide just recently, with many businesses are spending a lot of time developing and building brand equity on third-party technology. What happens when that third-party technology goes, you're not playing to our rules? They completely shut us down. And we saw that happened to Australia here with media and news outlets. People around the world, particularly my colleagues in the US, cannot believe that that's happened. But that's the kind of thing that does happen. So yes, great having all of these social media platforms, but make sure a priority for your business moving forward is having your own database, your own asset that you can continue to nurture and that no one can take away from you. So you need to think about that. This needs to be a strategy that you think of, whether it be a quiz or a checklist. I know that a number of you might have professional services where you've got different divisions and different departments, and that's where you're going to have to sit down and really hone in on what's our client's greatest need and greatest struggle, and something that they would really find beneficial and valuable, and maybe create a PDF or something that enables them to, download that, give their email address and so forth, but it be the start of the journey. That's something that you need to consider, but it can work really, really well. You might have a number of different PDFs or something like that that you have as part of that strategy. And it depends which of your team members are being interviewed on the podcast. But I'm assuming, and this of course is for other podcasts too, if someone is a specialist in the area of corporate mergers, they might have a checklist on the top 10 top 10 mistakes and the top 10 must-haves when you're contemplating a corporate merger. And that would be a nice giveaway. The interview's about that. By the way, we've got a checklist, some things that you need to be mindful of. Here's how you access it. And then they're on your database. So just kind of giving you a bit of an overview. This is all prepared before you even start interviewing. Something else that you can create as well that works really well is a one-sheet suggested interview questions for the host. Now, if you've been on my podcast or Business Women Australia podcast, you'll know that if I get a title, I can come up with a lot of different questions and keep the conversation flowing really nicely, creating a beautiful storyline that ends with a nice call to action. But not all podcast hosts can do that. So, and even some media, I remember being taught, I went through a 12-month media course program, said give journalists questions because they're often so busy with lots of different interviews and back-to-backs that it's really helpful. And that makes sure that you're asked the right questions that set you up for success and that you just then answer. So that's really good too. You can send that to the podcast host before the show. And if the host leaves out a specific important question, get comfortable with what I coined when I wrote this presentation. I thought, what can I call it? Let's just call it the strategic backtrack. They don't even know that you do this. So if they ask you a question, you think, oh, that's actually the second point. I want to share the first point. You can say something to them like, oh, Lyn, that is such a great question. Look, before I answer that, there's just one little step that I want to draw your attention to, because then it's going to make so much more sense when I answer your question. Now, this first step that you need to be aware of, see how I've just backtracked, just that strategic backtrack, and that makes sure that everybody comes along that conversation. And that's the kind of thing that you want to do, is to really prepare that this is the kind of information that's really important that I want to get out, because I know that if my ideal client is listening or watching, if it's a TV, interview, that they know exactly what you're talking about because they're struggling with that, or that's the solution that they're looking for. And of course, they're going to resonate with that conversation that you're sharing. So here are some things during the interview. This could be a whole other webinar on its own, but with an interview structure, I really love to follow what I was taught years ago when I was doing my NLP training, the format. And that really is the number 4, why, what, how, and what if. I use this every time if I'm doing a webinar or an introduction or a little presentation that is 5 minutes long, 50 minutes long, or 5 hours long. I would follow this particular format. And the reason why is, adult learners are far more skeptical and time poor, and they're always looking at, well, what's in it for me? Why should I listen to this person? What relevance does it have? And so you want to start out your interview structure with why, address why it's so important. One of the things that if I'm talking about personal branding, I might say, businesses today, if you're using the same message that you were using 18 months ago, you're using the wrong message, because the message that got you to where you are now is not the message moving forward, because your ideal client has probably, through what's happened, really got more pressing issues than they did. So you need to look at changing your message. And today I'm going to share 3 tips to help you hone in on how to reshape your message so you're still relevant today as you were 18 months ago for your ideal client. Then I would go into the what validate what you are sharing with some sources and studies. And this format, for those of you who are kind of the what the audio are thinking, or the auditory people are thinking, well, what studies have based this on? Why is this relevant? Well, as you know, there are so many different studies and, around the globe now online that share how so many more people are online, so many more businesses are online because of what's happened. And I would bring in some statistics, some studies that have been done so that I validate what I have just said, my why. So for you share your why, what has just happened, why it's so important and what you're going to share. And then you validate it with some external or maybe some own studies that you and your organization have done. You're validating what you've just shared to be true. And then you can dive into some of the how. Then you dive into some steps, some insights, and you can unpack that a little bit, obviously through the conversation with the host. This is where some of those questions are really good. You can ask the questions snapshot that I mentioned earlier. Why not have the questions in sequence and say, ask these in sequence and go why? Why is it so important that businesses know this now? What are some of the evidence that validates this to be true, that businesses need to know about? What are some key steps? What do I need to do next? And I just follow that format. The how, I would say 3 key points is really good. 3 key points that you can dive a little bit deeper into, but gives people an overview of the things that they don't know. You always market and give visibility to the things that people don't know. And some of the things they may not know are changes in the industry, things that you have implemented that have been innovative, that are challenging the status quo. Don't have to be the next Elon Musk, but you want to innovate and show why the information you're sharing is different from everybody else that's sharing, that kind of content in your industry. And it may just be one unique approach to way that you're doing business. And this is where you educate and bring value into the how aspect. And when you do this really well, you share some case studies as well. Within that, you can do that. That's when you really continue to build your reputation as that trusted authority. And then the what if, summarize what's possible. I always like to share with people, and I might say something like this, because a lot of times I speak quickly and I've got a lot of content and people are often going, wow. And I validate by going, by the way, I have just scratched the surface. We go a lot deeper into a lot of areas which I couldn't have covered today because of time limits. However, if you want to know more, I've created a checklist for you. You are more than welcome to download it. It's our free gift to you, and that's going to really help you get clear on some of the things that I talked about today, which is so important when you're thinking about tie it back to the original why this is so important, which is obviously going to be an outcome driven statement. And gets people off that podcast interview and onto your list. Okay, so now it's during the interview. Now this is after the interview where you just want to leverage by repurposing your interview. A lot of people think, done my interview, that's all I need to do. Actually, this is where the work starts, believe it or not. Everything that I've just shared with you up till now is kind of what you really need to have in place as part of business development and getting ready for PR and publicity opportunities. Now it's about leveraging and incorporating that as part of your ongoing marketing. And this is where you can create micro content posts, which, as I mentioned, should be part of that ongoing visibility and PR. And I'm going to share a little bit more of the tools that I use and how we use them. Now, there's always a page that you can put on your website that enables you to showcase all of the interviews that you've done. If you've gotten permission from the media platform to show their logo, you can add that to that page as well. And this page instantly builds that trusted authority aspect around you, particularly if you've got some really great, logos and interviews on there from people and organizations that are reputable. And of course, having that BWA podcast, graphic there is always going to be one that people, because that's what BWA is doing. Where they're creating this incredible reputation in the marketplace. So that immediately passes down to you, because, what happens is the media profile that they have and the standing automatically passes to you. So don't miss these opportunities to compile this all in one place. And if you link back to the original media place, that's fantastic, because if they've got high ranking in Google, and I'm not an SEO specialist, but check, there's something in this. If they've got high ranking and they're reputable and Google thinks they're reputable, and they're linking and you're linking to them, and they're probably linking to you, especially podcast hosts will link back, then that is going to help with your ranking too. And then the additional tip, what you can do, and we want you to do this with BWA podcast interviews as well. You may not realize you can do this. Take the code of the player and embed it into your website as a blog post. Take the show notes off there and put it on there as well, or type up your own. And then what you do is every time that you are sending people to your interview, you send them back to your own website. The player you don't have to by embedding the player, you don't have to upload the audio or anything like that. You just play it directly off our host, and you'll be able to benefit from that. But then when you start to do all of the strategies that I'm going to share with you in a moment, guess where you're sending people back to? Your own website to listen to the full show. But firstly, do a media page, and then list all of the different graphics. And what I used to do in my career industry, this is before I had multiple podcasts. Now I just send everyone to Ambitious Entrepreneur Network, because that's where all of my interviews and podcasts are. But have a page, and then I would do them via month, because I would get often, asked to either speak or do an article, and then I would take a snapshot of the article and include it in that too. And that was just there, and people could find that on that page. All right, so here's some more fun stuff. How to repurpose your interview into multiple content snippets so that you can continue to build your leadership. As I said, embed the interview on your website as a blog post. Very simple, and that should be an absolute given. Then what you can do is you can get your interview transcribed, and the tool that I use is on that link there. It's fabulous. In fact, when I shared this with one of my clients, she said her jaw literally dropped. She had no idea. Mind you, she's in her 70s and she's now got her own podcast. So you're never too old to learn the technology. But what's really great about that is the transcription. It's now in Word form. You might have to go back and tweak the English, because I think that particular technology may have a bit of difficulty with the Aussie accent. And every now and again, I've got an Aussie, New Zealand, Kiwi accent, so I confuse her even more. So what you then do is take snippets of that transcription and then create micro core content posts. Like, just say, for instance, you're in finance or an accountant or something like that. You take a component of that. It may be something that the industry or other media outlets are talking about too. Add that in there, some statistics, and write some thoughts. So you can use the original podcast interview to bounce off further posts where you elaborate even more. But what you then do is you say, by the way, and link back to the original podcast interview so that people can hear the entire interview. So there's just so many different things you can do. From that transcription, you can create some quote graphics from social media. Every now and again, I don't know if you have this, you say something, you think, that was good, I should tweet that. Well, now here's an opportunity to create these snippets that, you're sharing on social, and you think that's going to make a difference. And then just use the tool there that I use, the Canva tool. And again, that quote can then have a little text, which gives a little bit more detail, and then linking back to the original interview, which you will have on your website, because you've done number one and you've embedded the interview on your website as a blog post. And then thirdly, you have permission from BWA. If you're going to do this with other podcasts, you might have to ask for their permission. Most of them say yes. But what you can do is, if you've got someone in your team who is able to take the audio and then create little audio snippets, so you might have a minute or 2 minutes where you just capture the sound bite, which really speaks into a challenge or a solution that you know your ideal customers will find helpful, and use a headliner there's the link, to create a video component of that. What you'll need is you'll need to use the Canva, create a nice little graphic, and then headliner brings in the audio and the graphic and creates a video, an MP4 format of that file. And then you can share that again across social, and you can have different pictures. And what's really nice is, when you're watching, so you're actually watching something and you see that kind of line, that audio line go up and down, that's what Headliner does for you. So it just adds a little bit more of a creative element on how you can use and really leverage that podcast. Now, I think that's this is the last slide. Just there alone, if you continue to do that consistently with your podcast, I mean, if you think of a 30-minute podcast interview, and 30 minutes is typically what we do at the length on BWA podcast, you can create some incredible snippets, some great quote graphics, which all really just go back to that original interview. And then with the compelling calls to action, you can then start to really build your list with that. So there you go, Lyn. That was we can take some questions, and if anyone has anything that they would like to ask about that.
Well, you've certainly covered so much. What I love about your presentations is the speed of them, is the speed that I like.
No, that's why I love podcasts, because I did a presentation.
This will be recorded, yeah, we are recording, and anyone who wants to go back and stop and listen and think about it in deeper ways, you'll be able to do that. We'll let you know when it's up on the Businesswomen Australia. This is not a podcast, so this will go in our webinars resources. So if you have a look on our website, all our webinars that are recorded are in there. Our podcasts are also linked on our website onto the way that Annemarie has suggested. So, and as we said, these are your resources. We really want you to think about how it fits into your overall marketing strategy. Annemarie, I've got a question. One of the first things you said was, when you're building awareness, you really have to have a clear idea of who your ideal audience is.
Yeah.
So this is taking it more back right to the beginning, when thinking about your podcast and thinking about your webinar. Obviously, if it's a live streamed podcast, it's a lot harder to dictate how you have an audience participate or listen. Annemarie and I talked about this the other day. We've moved our Businesswomen Australia podcast into a live streaming environment. Where do they go across, Annemarie? They go across multiple platforms?
Yeah, they go across multiple, across LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. The beautiful thing about that is it's not just audio, it's video snippet too. So you are able to download the video and cut that into snippets. That's what I'm doing and seeing across LinkedIn, because you can have those, short, sharp, 60-second. And what you mentioned there earlier, Lyn, I was going to mention about, being so quick. Often when you are on a podcast interview, or maybe even a radio interview, it is short and sharp. And so you can say, look, we just rapidly went through that. I know for some of you want to dive deeper, and that's that call to action again with that resource or the checklist or something like that. And so
this is the thing too, is that in your notes, in your show notes, when you're pushing it out, it's important to have those links about where people can see it, because I'll quite often get a notification that there's an interesting live stream occurring right now, and I'm going, oh, gee, that sounds good. And then I'm like, oh, is there a recording? Isn't there a recording? So, all these little tied up loose ends are so important, so that people can, see it and then find it and then look at it at their own pace if they miss the live stream. Yeah. Obviously, all of ours are held on the Businesswomen Australia podcast, ambitious entrepreneur platform so that people can go and find them and look at them after the event. Any other questions? Have we got any other questions? Helen, you've got one coming up, a podcast. What's going through your mind at the moment?
Yes, I booked in on 28th of April with Annemarie. So I just wonder what kind of contents I would like to share my audience and how it's how I can position myself as a financial advisor who would like to differentiate the service from other advisors. So
a couple of things that I would recommend you look at. I mean, there may be some clients that you've worked with that really can be niche down. So, the more highly niched you are, the narrower the niche, the more you can really speak to them. And so you might find that when you do a bit of an audit of your existing customers, that there is a theme. And that theme could show up in the different struggles that people have, in the solutions that you've help them with, and the outcome that they desire, so that you speak specifically into that. Because I would imagine too that you would have some resources, or the way that you just approach your work would really speak to them and support them in the best way. Because one of the things that I didn't mention in this, but this is so important too, is you may be thinking, well, look, I'm one of hundreds of thousands of these consultants or this coach working in Australia, around the world, in this area. But what is really unique is your story, your journey, and the experience that you create. And there's two things that I often talk about. They're markers and milestones. So markers and milestones is going to be helpful for everyone. A marker, I call, is a significant event, where it be a challenge or a situation that you've had to handle. And through the handling of that marker, that situation, you've probably come up with either a tactic or a system or a step to help you address that. And that marker may very well be a principle or an insight that you now share with your ideal clients. The milestones are the successes that you've had through addressing that challenge. Now, if you marry in and weave in that unique storyline, and it's going to resonate with your ideal clients, this is what's going to really help you stand out, because your ideal client really resonates with what you've just shared. And I'll give you an example. If you want to really hone down your message, it's relevant for a podcast, but also the way in which you introduce yourself. If your current introduction and the way you speak about yourself, someone with the same background and similar experiences can take your name out of that paragraph, add their name into that paragraph, and speak that, and it does resonate. They're not lying or anything, because they kind of, then you're not distinguishable and you're not uncopyable. In fact, you are copyable because they're sharing the same message. So spend some time, especially for you, Helen, in thinking about some of those markers and milestones, and then look to weave that in. Like one of my markers and milestones, I didn't share it in this one, it's another podcast training that I do, was when I always struggled to monetize our podcast when we first started in 2008. But then I started Women in Leadership podcast after my worst business failure ever, which, by the way, is now the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was a kick up the backside that I needed. But 3 episodes into Women in Leadership, not many people know this, I might have shared this with you, Lyn, was when that partnership, which had a 7-figure pipeline, came to an end, and I was just burned out. And I thought, I can't put content creation together, but I knew I could ask really good questions. So I thought, I'm going to go out and seek incredible women, and I'm going to interview them. But what happened was 3 episodes in, I accidentally got 2 4-figure clients. And it wasn't till years later that I thought, man, if I could identify the steps and repeat them, would that be possible? And so hence that's where podcasting with purpose came about. No one can share that story because it's not anyone else's story or journey. So I share that because in your background, if you turn around and join the dots, you would be able to, what I call the invisible thread of milestones and markers, that when you weave around your expertise, takes your message to, because no one else can speak that, in your background, in your history, and the challenges overcome. And maybe that some of those things validate why you're so passionate about your particular industry and sharing that message. And if he or she, your ideal client is listening to that, that's going to resonate the most. And that really helps take that interview and you and why they want to know you and work with you rather than many others. Does that help?
Yes.
Vida, you've done a bit of podcasting in the past, haven't you? And what are you thinking at the moment about? You've got a lot of stuff going on. You're doing an additional brand. You're creating a new space. So you're juggling two kinds of brands with inspiration source and inspiration space. What could podcasts audiences look like for you and your messaging?
Oh, I think she might be on mute, Vida.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, I've been definitely thinking about getting into podcasting, but I had this really amazing experience on the weekend where I sort of like dropped the ball, and I realised all my priorities had become equal, and I was trying to do too many things at once. And I made this really hard decision on the weekend to not do any events for April or May. Just cut them out and spend 2 months setting up the space, because I'm opening a new venue, and spend 2 months doing the fit out, setting up the space and getting my content ready to start podcasting. So what you said, Annemarie, about having a media page, I was thinking, that'd be really strange if I've just got one thing to put up there. So I thought, and I'd love your advice on this, is to get the content ready, and like you're saying, my checklist or whatever, to get a few ready so that I can do a few things and then put them all up at the.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you should say about the different, different arms of your business, and many of us do, aren't we? We're entrepreneurial, so try and box us to just do one thing. But what you might find is that there's an umbrella statement that encompasses all of what you do, which means that when you're thinking about your podcast, if you find all of the intersecting things, and what you might want to do is write a list of the things that you are working on and look at, just writing down what the benefits are, how you help clients, the problems and what they're seeking. And then the intersecting things that are similar across those lists, let that be what ties the message and the branding and, what you stand for in the podcast, because you might find that someone's interested in using that space. Maybe that space, but then also you might be talking about mindset and other things so that you can trickle them, you take them to the journey, through that journey. And you might find too, and again, if you're looking at that customer journey, often there are multiple different things that you can offer the client. However, you don't want to offer everything to them when they first open the door, because it's like, I'm not going to close the door. They're already overwhelmed. So what you would want to think of, what is the most pressing need and the greatest, amount of visibility in that I know if I'm sharing my message, there's going to be a great audience. And from those, I know it's going to trickle down, and my ideal client is going to be amongst that, and the seed and leading and, calls to action is going to get her or him to step off. So start with the most pressing need and where there is a most pressing need, and really develop the message around that. Does that make sense? Because then, yeah, like for instance, I've got a client who in Canada who is a CFO. Now, many of the principles that she teaches and her ideal client probably is not going to hire her straight away from the podcast. But if she talks about, my ideal client starts talking about cash flow, because that's the greatest issue, isn't it? Cash flow. And then kind of different scenarios, it'll be the small incremental steps as she's building know, like, and trust, but speaking specifically and honing down to what she knows her ideal client, what's showing up in her world. And that's the kind of thing you want to think about your ideal client. That's that customer journey. So you can meet them where they're at, but, build rapport, and then kind of nurture them into your community. And before you know it, especially the people who have their own podcast, you've created your own platform where they will lap up everything. They'll binge listen. They'll be going, Vida, when's the next podcast episode coming out? We can't wait to hear it. That's the kind of thing that you can create when you do it well. And it's good you're taking some time to think about what that's going to look like for you.
Yeah. I think so, because I felt like I was just doing too many things at once and I couldn't do anything perfectly. So I think, I can go back now and have a really clear strategy and not such a divided strategy.
That sounds very wise, Vita. And I'm looking at Louise M. I know we might get a little pop in from one of your grandkids there. It's gorgeous. I'm loving that. But Louise M has, so she's got a retail platform. She sells beautiful quality shoes for corporate and flight staff. So if Louise was being interviewed on a podcast and not sounding like she's trying to sell shoes, what would be your advice to Louise M when she gets invited as a guest?
Yeah, interesting. So a couple of things to consider. I mean, I would always ask myself, what are some of the issues and challenges that women struggle with, or maybe men as well? My ideal client struggles with when it comes to an area that you specialize in. Now, it may very well be, I don't know, just pulling some ideas out of my head. What happens if they get the wrong shoes? How's that going to impact their health? How is it going to, those kind of things? And so shoes. So what else does she do for even for flights? For people who...
For cabin crew.
For cabin crew, okay. And so I would also ask as well myself, okay, so what kind of questions are they asking when they're looking for shoes? What are some of the myths and mistruths that are out there in the industry as well that you can kind of challenge that status quo? So it's really building some information that they're going to want to know more about. And I'll give you an example in this, because sometimes other examples we can kind of go, and layer that over our own. I was speaking to someone the other day who, what does she do? She does astronomy. So she is in somewhere rural Victoria, I believe, and she gets groups of people out and they look at the stars. But what she also wants to do is to not only build awareness for her business, but build awareness for the community around her, so that when people are booking their trips to come and see her, they also know about Christine and the local wine bottle. And by the way, she's got a winery and this person has here. So I said, imagine if you collaboratively, and BWA loves collaboration too, but you collaboratively go and interview other people in that local area, because the overall strategy and what's the end in mind is to build the profile of people around us. So collaboratively, you can build your audience and so forth as well. But it really is, you are a journalist. Think of yourself as a journalist. What message is my ideal client really interested in? Are there some new things happening in the industry that's quite exciting that I can share? Myths and, mistruths that people don't even know about shoes. I mean, I can make any conversation really interesting. Just let me say that, even if it's because things are interesting, things that we don't know that could impact. You could get the wrong shoes and you may need to, long term, if you don't realize, end up in a chiropractor for the rest of your life, because you're doing damage to your back, especially with flight attendants having these long hauls. Maybe not quite yet, but when things resume, you resume again. But you see, you can really storytell. I like to mind map, because once you've got an idea and you go, what's an offshoot of that? And what's an offshoot of that? The trouble probably then is, what are the pieces that I will share? Because there's so much that I can share.
Yeah, I seem to, because I've just started being a guest on some podcasts, and it's more the challenges of like my story, and then how I've gone about finding the shoes and the challenges along the way, and how I've resolved those challenges. So that tends to be what they're wanting to hear. I'm finding the call to action. And through those challenges, I'm telling about the shoes, and the makeup of the shoes. So it comes across that way. The difficulty I'm finding is, sorry, it's my granddaughter next to me if you hear anything, is the call to action.
Yeah.
Compelling call to action.
So what is if you think your ideal client is listening to the podcast and then rushes over to your website and takes an action, like, is it that to purchase shoes, or what kind of things can he or she do?
Well, that's the thing. I think, the only thing really is a discount, and I really don't want to be doing that. My product is direct to consumer, so I don't have a lot of profit in my price.
Yeah. Well, if rather than reduce, I go value add up. And so if you in your interview, and that value add up may be the fact that you've got so much knowledge and experience in your industry is the additional value, because you're going to, there's things that you do and that the support of the shoe and whatever it is that they're looking for, that you're going to be able to really help them with. And so for you, I think it's just like, a brand, if you think of what Apple has done, it's just a computer. Why do people camp overnight when the latest iPhone is going to be released? Because it's the experience that they create. It's that brand reputation that they create. So, when you're thinking about your shoes, I'm sure, and your ideal client, it's not just a shoe, it's how she feels with that shoe. What are some of the other things for that woman? Do you just work with women?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Women's shoes. What is it about that shoe that makes her feel so good? And so, if you build it up like that, your ideal client and it may just not be any person that can buy a shoe that goes down, to spend less shoe. I would not imagine that that's your ideal client, but there's something within that you can also give to them that is just going to help make her go, oh, I just love this. I don't know what that is for you. You're going to maybe have to think about that, because it's not just a shoe. And I would even go so far as that part of your interview is a little bit, like that it's not just about the shoe, it's about the experience or how the shoe makes you feel, something like that. Because it is, isn't it, Lyn? I mean, it's fun.
The thing that I love about Louise's shoes, and I'm one of Louise's raving fans, because I'm running up and down the terrace often, from one client to another, and I'm on my feet a lot during the day, and I can be running up and down the terrace with these amazing shoes on. And so I was just thinking then, when you're talking about, the idea of the download and the checklist, something that you could think of is something around the whole well-being, health and well-being, what are other things, like little exercises that you can do that stretch your calves, like a little exercise sheet that also has an upsell on about your brand, in a little shadow box, because what you're trying to do is get people's lists so that you can then get them onto, because you have the most gorgeous emails. So you've already got your funnels, you've got your nurturing process. So it's around getting them in there. So getting people to want to download, the top 5 exercises when you're on your feet all day. Or whatever it might be, something that's tied to, but not necessarily directly connected to just the shoe.
But where it ties back, and that's fantastic, Lyn, great, is that you might look at some statistics in the industry that shows the damage that people do when they don't do exercise, look after their feet, and the wrong sort of shoe for their feet. And if you weave that into your podcast, that again, women don't know, we don't know that. So if you're sharing that and saying, this is one of the reasons why I love this brand, because this brand is all about health and safety, or whatever language that it used. And so that call to action, then what that does is the content that you share builds insight and compelling, intriguing reasons why when you share. And by the way, I've got a list of things that you need to do, exercises on how you can look after your feet, and by the way, just out of interest, are there different, let's have a look. How you've got people that have different management styles for time management. Are there different categories of feet? Well, all about flat foot or high foot. I don't know.
High arches, wide feet. Yeah. Well, there are.
If people don't know that about themselves, they're choosing the wrong sort of shoe. So if you can also create a quiz that'll help people identify what sort of foot they have so that they can make better choices with footwear purchases, I want that. I don't know what sort of foot I am, and what you could be doing, the damage that you could be doing to your feet and back if you don't get the right shoes for your style foot. I reckon that quiz would be great.
Great, thank you. And I love your tips about
they are good tips.
To
We've got 5 more minutes. So just, Georgina, how are you going with your podcast? You took the brave leap a year ago or whatever. Would it be over a year now?
So I've been running my podcast for 6 months now. Yeah.
6 months.
Yeah, it's going really well, actually, really happy with it. And I've now been given a project at my work to produce a podcast that we've gotten funding for. So I did have 2 quick questions for you, Annemarie. My first question was, how many listeners should you be getting each episode to, I guess, qualify your energy being put into producing a podcast? Like, how many, is there a certain number that you think that, or at least like a minimum number that we should be getting to make it feel like this is worth the time and energy that we're investing? And then secondly, I'd be interested if you could touch on monetizing a podcast and seeking sponsorship for the episodes, running ad reels in the middle of them. Like, how many listeners each episode do you need to have before you can start monetizing it? And how much can you ask businesses to pay?
Yeah, great.
For those ad reels.
What's your business? What's the business that they're that's starting the podcast?
So I work for a non-for-profit in the mental health space, and they're creating a podcast for truck drivers to increase awareness around truck driver wellbeing and suicide prevention.
Right.
It's a way to interview truck drivers who are out on the road about what they do to stay healthy and happy. So it's mainly around just a brand awareness tool to drive traffic to the website. But I just was interested to see, what are the kind of, what's the limit?
Fine. And so do you provide services or how do you get
So we provide services in resources for how they can stay healthy and happy.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of things that I'll just share very briefly. So firstly, for any business, if you provide a service or a program or anything like that, I would say first and foremost, look to monetize your podcast with your own message and your own programs. Because if you look around the route of sponsorships and advertising, it's a completely different model. One of the misassumptions and the mistakes that many businesses make is they look at a podcast and they compare it and think that it is like mainstream media, which it is absolutely not. Mainstream media, radio, the kind of like the spray and pray, we've got millions of things and hopefully a portion of that audience, and that kind of sponsorship advertising model, particularly for smaller businesses, is not the best route to go. Because
I'm thinking of monetizing my own personal podcast that I was running, but I was curious to know if the business were to run the podcast.
Yeah, this is for both.
Okay, cool.
Both. Because I'm assuming your own personal podcast, you've got services or products or programs or so that you can monetize at the back end. So to answer your question about what kind of listeners and downloads, with a podcast that if you're using to monetize your own message and then through that nurturing funnel, that know, like, and trust, a portion of those people are going to put up their hand to then invest in you and step into your program. That is going to consistently work for you if you've got the right steps and obviously, really nurturing that process well. And so I always say to people, don't worry about numbers, because I would rather focus on building reputation equity and your position as a trusted authority, so people see you as not only a choice, but the choice, and you being the only person that they step forward. And that's the same across your business or your personal business, or the business and your personal business. And so obviously the call to action and kind of the seed and lead strategy. By the way, we've got our so-and-so workshop coming up. If you're interested, more details on the website. Having a highly niche podcast that way, you'll have more highly engaged audience. So you don't need to have thousands of downloads. But typically, do you know how many downloads you're currently getting for
my personal one? I have around 450 listens a week.
Yeah, no, that's good. There's a standard. I've got some who've got anywhere from, say, 100, 150 upwards. But if that 150 are highly engaged and already customers, that's going to also build in the retention, isn't it? Because you're continuing to keep in touch and have that as a really solid touch point. But what I would look at, again, for, the business now that want to run a podcast, there may be some checklists and resources that people who've listened to the podcast can go and access. And as soon soon as they've accessed that, it then goes into that funnel, which I'm assuming has some form of keep in touch, and that's the thing that you want to do now. On top of that, as you continue to really build awareness of an audience, there may be some alliance partners who have the same audience who you can then interview, but then also can put some money alongside to support that podcast. But that they're going to be very relevant to your listeners, because one of the things that is constant feedback from podcast listeners is they hate ads. So if businesses are looking at a podcast and doing a similar thing with a ad stack and do that, you'll lose your audience, which is interesting because we see a lot of now people, comparing and doing that on their podcasts, and unfortunately they're actually breaking the rapport that it's taken so long to build. So there's a balance between that. When you bring on a sponsor, you need to bring them in as a real storytelling aspect of things. So it's not doesn't seem like, hey, all of a sudden, here's this service or product which is suddenly being advertised. Does that help? So advertise that own message, get people off the podcast with a really compelling resource that is going to be helpful, and then they'll continue to be nurtured through that sequence that you would have as part of the marketing.
Thank you.
I'm aware we're at the end of our time, Annemarie. Are there any other urgent questions? Are we able to hold you for a couple more minutes?
Sure. Yes.
I just have one question for you, Annemarie. Sorry, Helen.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Okay. How do you go about being or finding hosts to then interview you? So you get all your resources ready and you're like, I'm ready to do a podcast. But if you're not familiar in this space, how do you actually go out and kind of market yourself and say, I'm available to be interviewed?
Well, obviously with Business Women Australia, that's one good place to start. Then I would go out and look for other podcast hosts, and you can go to Spotify or Apple and do a bit of a search around for some of those podcasts. Now, if there are some podcasts that are highly niched as well and who've got your audience, I would really reach out to them, particularly do a little bit of research on some of the shows that they've had, and then see if you can share a little bit of what you do, piggybacking off that previous show. That happened to me today. Someone emailed me and said, love your show, I've been following you for some time, love this particular episode. And by the way, he actually shared with me a snapshot of that, and he said, this is what I've done because of that interview. Thank you very much. Now, and then he flipped it, and then he said, and now I'm so excited because now I'm ready to do X, Y, and Z. And this would be a really valuable topic for your audience. Would this be something that you would consider interviewing me on? And, for me, if that was so unique and so I could tell that he really spent time on that. And I thought, if someone is willing to spend that much time to do a snapshot and everything, he's really concerned about the value he brings to my audience. So it's going to be a yes. So do some research. You don't have to be on every single podcast, but the ones that you may even listen to them and, even follow some of those people across social, start to share some of their content. I often notice that as well. And then you may reach out and then chat across LinkedIn as well, and then put yourself forward and say, look, love your show, would be interested in, and send them in a bit more detail about some of the value adds that you're going to be sharing with their audience.
So Kylie, we will get approached probably one a day for someone that wants to be featured on our podcast show, either through directly emailing me or through our contact form or through their PR agency. And so what we do is, and I'm sure that anyone else that has a podcast show looks at, well, who is this person? What's their profile like? What's the win-win for me and for them? For me, I would say, would they be someone we would invite to come as a premium level member? Would they want to participate and become involved in Business Women Australia? Because we really want to be profiling our leaders. So in fact, we've in the last 12 months, we've probably had about 5 new premium members join through their PR agents. as a result of wanting to be featured on our podcast show, because they've met the criteria. We've gone back and said, well, you know, we would be honoured to have, Becky to be on our show, but, you know, we would love for her to join as a premium, and we will nominate her for that level. But there's an involvement in our community that comes with being on our podcast show. So I'm sure other podcasters, Annemarie gets so many that she gets spammed to go on to her podcast show. And that's why this guy, by doing something a little bit different, it's like trying to get in front of a journalist. New podcasters are often looking for people to have on their shows. I know Kathy Smith in our community, she does the small business chats. So Kylie, you would probably be a perfect person to have on hers because she's building an audience. She's now got quite a massive audience internationally. And being in the Business Women Australia network, and Kathy is one of our leaders in BWA, she'd be very open. It's a nice way, sort of gently, and so reach out to her if you're interested in being a guest. And sort of, I know you're thinking about when the right time is to step up to be a premium, maybe when you finish your MBA. Yeah. What we'll do then is sit down and say, well, who is your ideal audience? Because what we also do is the podcast, the webinar, and an article in Buzz magazine for our premiums. And we really need to know how to position you so that we also then invite into the webinar program who your ideal clients might be and who they look like. So there's a lot of strategic work we do, which sort of teaches our premiums to be a little bit more strategic around understanding who their audience is as well. Karina, did you have any questions?
No, I actually really enjoy all the tips and all the information that Annemarie just shared. And I was just agreeing with a lot of the things that she was telling, especially with knowing who is your ideal client and what you're going to bring to the podcast. What are you actually offering, and really think beforehand what is that the tactics that are related to what you offer, what you actually do. I think that's brilliant because I guess you have a lot of people that is focused on different areas, but it's actually what do you want to get at the end of the day, what you want to be recognized for, and everything always has to go related to your offering. So I just thought that she was very clear on the things that she was sharing and the step by step of how she would be done. I think it was just great.
Yeah, it's so important. You know, we get so many of our members even saying, you know, when I say to them, okay, what topic are you going to speak to? You know, what's your message? And they'll say, oh, what does your audience want to hear? And I go, please, can you stop saying that? Because it's not that, it's about how you're going to use this in your strategy. So who is your audience? What do you want them to hear? What do you want to be known for? What do you want to be positioned as? What do you want to be known to be a leader in? This is about you, not about you entertaining this concept of an audience. So think very strategically about your positioning. And I think Annemarie's done such an amazing job today at trying to highlight that. And it's a message we have to keep repeating over and over and over again. You are not going on a podcast to entertain other people's audience. You want to use that podcast opportunity to create collateral that you can use to engage your target client. So thank you so much, Annemarie. That's
you
awesome.
are welcome.